All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch. We have got a very big show today. We are full of the questions that are from you, our Property Couch community. We are covering interest rates. We are covering what to do when you go into maternity leave. And Ben is not with us at the moment, so we'll also cover cross-collateralised properties, and we're going to talk a little bit, another spin on the Queensland property tax. But if you're wondering where Ben is, you need to stick around for the show to see what's happened to Ben. Let's rip in right now, folks.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, Chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast, and welcome. Actually, I would normally throw to Ben at this point in time, but I just have to let you all know that I've benched him as a result of the game on Saturday night. So for those of you that are in the community for some time, you would know that Ben is a Collingwood supporter and I'm a Freo supporter. We played on Saturday night and Ben won, right? So he sent me a text at the end of the game, tried to be conciliatory. So I thought the only course of action that was appropriate here was to bench him. I've got three reasons for that, folks. One, the swagger that he was operating with was just enormous. So that's number one. Number two, can you imagine the obnoxious reliving of 100 plays in the first quarter and the second quarter and the third quarter? So I thought on behalf of all other teams around Australia, you're welcome that you didn't have to hear that. And then the third reason was very simple. Being a long suffering Fremantle supporter for 27 years, and to be honest, not being able to pip Collingwood very often since me and Ben have actually done the podcast together, it was just incredibly satisfying for me to do it. So I just thought this early banter stage, he had to be benched. I think it's appropriate. So let us know if that was appropriate, or if there's Collingwood supporters out there who think that that is highly inappropriate. We want to hear from you as well. So there you go. Quick shout out for our summer series. Did it last week.
Bryce, I'm back.
You're back, are you?
Something just happened. I was kicked out of the podcast, but I was able to log back in. Have we done the intro yet?
Done the intro, mate. We can move on.
Well, let's talk about the game then, shall we? You beauty.
There we go.
Look, can I just say, Bryce, there was 91,000 people there.
90,812.
Yeah, so I rounded up. I've never seen a more attractive, well-educated group looking. I'm including all the Purple Army that was there as well.
Oh,
what
nice.
A wonderful spectacle of all those beautiful people celebrating a game, our native Indigenous game. It was just the winner on the night, Bryce, was footy. Let's just call it that. The winner was footy. And also the Pies get a W, and we move on to the next round.
So, folks, if you go back to my list, number three, there was three. Number one was the swagger. You just saw it. So I tried to save you from that. Hey, Ben, to rub salt into the wound, I drove all the way from Torquay to the MCG. I found a little spot in Little Lonsdale Street that's worked for me wonderfully every time I've parked for a day MCG game. I took my youngest Samuel to the game with me. And we parked in. It was a car park. Went downstairs. So afterwards, we've gone back to the car park, and the joint was in gridlock. The storm was playing as well. Yeah. No one was getting out of the car park. So Samuel looks at him. He goes, "Dad, can we go on the scooter?" I said, "Of course, mate." So we went and rented a scooter.
Well, two scooters, of course.
Well, I was about to say, for all those parents listening with their kids in the car, just drop the volume down a little bit here. If you're a police person, please drop the volume, because I did dink him around. That's illegal. I have since reflected on that, but he loved it. It was so great. We get back to the game, Ben. So I get back to the car park. I get to the car park at 10:50, Ben. All the Collingwood supporters were up and about. And then I get to my car at about 10:52, and I get out of the car park at 12:10.
Wow.
And then I get home, Samuel in bed by 1:30. So the latest he's ever been up. His mum was stressed. And so he and I had a ripping time together. But clearly there was no cigar for Freo. So, but folks, I did try and save it from the swagger, but well done, mate.
Yes, I'm sorry that it had to end that way, but I think, in all honesty, we've certainly got our work cut out this weekend. So I think maybe our little is going to be
very... Now you're on the reverse psychology thing, so don't think that's going to get you any sympathy. The whole of the country is going for Sydney, so go the Swans. So
go the Swannies, right here. Okay.
Very good. Hey, my Mindset Minute theme today, Ben, is something that crossed my path and I've been reflecting on. I think it's pretty good, right? So this is from Alex Hormozy, if you want to go and check it out.
Yep.
You can get good enough at almost anything in 20 hours of focused effort. The problem is most people spend years delaying the first hour.
Ooh.
Let that land.
Yeah.
Let that land. You think about property investing, you could read our book, for example, in 4 hours, 3.5 hours. Then you can go and listen to some podcasts, and you can go and watch some YouTube videos, and you can get your 20 hours up, and you would be more informed than most people, particularly now because there's so many great resources. But if you are procrastinating on the first hour, that focused effort's never going to come. So I thought that would be worth people reflecting on. If you can get good at almost anything in 20 hours of focused effort, why are you procrastinating on delaying the first hour? Now, I'm human, Ben. There's stuff too that I'm doing with that, but I've got to say, when the things that matter around lifestyle design, I would be the antithesis of that. I'm 100% ready to dive in and listen and watch and learn and ask as many questions as I can. So, folks, if that gave you a little ping in the guts, just have a think about that over the next few days to see if that relates to you and whether you can actually start that first hour. Because once you do, the remaining 19 happen pretty quickly. You never know, you'd be well on the way to something that you want to do. There was a book that I read, Ben, called The First 20 Hours. The author is Josh Kaufman, and he actually breaks down how to learn a skill in 20 hours and the process you need to do, the energy you need to focus, what you need to focus on first, how to actually get the sequencing right so that you can actually nail that. So the first20hours.com, go and check that out, go and get that book. No paid advertisement here whatsoever, Ben. It's just a book that's
it's a ripper.
That's over the journey.
Hey, just picking up on this theme, Bryce, my son Jackie plays the drums. One of the drum teachers gave us a really great little tip, and he just said, just ask him to do it for 10 minutes every couple of days, right? Because what happens with drums or any type of instrument, actually, once you start getting into it, all of a sudden you've done 20, 30 or 40 minutes anyway. So that was, I thought, what a great little tip in terms of just do it for 10. And then as they're enjoying it and putting some music in their ears and tapping away, it just means they do a bit of extra than they thought they would. And I thought, okay, that's a nice little hack. I like that. That's
a brilliant one. If you think about James Clear with his book Atomic Habits, he says don't fall in love with the goal, i.e. learning to play the drums, fall in love with the habit. So if you can get the focus on those first 10 minutes, you and I both know very well that 10 becomes 12, becomes 15, becomes 30 very quickly.
Very quickly.
So if you shift your focus and the goal is the habit, not the outcome. The outcome just becomes the end product of the stacking over time with a long enough time horizon from those habits. So
getting good at it. Awesome.
Nice one. Hey, Q&A day today, Ben. We got some really good questions. You'd probably be surprised, well, you won't be, but there's no surprises that there's an interest rate, finance, cost to investors themes for today, because they're the topical issues of the day. So let's have a little listen to the first question we have got today from Jim.
G'day, Bryce and Ben. Ivis, how are you? Yeah, that's what I thought. My question is around interest rates going up and what happens to the extra money that's collected from mortgage repayments. Do the banks get their cash from the RBA? And if so, where does that extra money actually go? I understand that some money can come from offshore. Are the banks getting are they holding on to the extra cash? The difference between what they can source their money at and what they're charging in interest rates. Be good to know what happens there. Keep up the good work. Love the podcast. Cheers. Bye.
Jim, great question, Ben. And it's probably something that, unless you're involved in the space, you probably haven't put a lot of thought into it up until now, particularly given that interest rates haven't gone up for some time, since back in 2010. But I think it'd be good for us to unpack and do a little 101 here about banks returning shareholders. It's kind of a extension of the conversation we had last week about how the banks get their net margin. So I think there's some 101 stuff that I think everyone will benefit here before we actually get to the core question of who actually gets the coin, Ben.
Yeah, I think there's a few things to sort of build on. The first thing is inside a bank, sort of fully fledged bank, they'll have a treasury component to that. Now, it's Treasury's job to sort of work out the money coming in and the money going out. And for full disclosure here, we are also enthusiastic amateurs when it comes to thinking about all of the dynamics around bond markets and these types of things.
100% enthusiastic amateurs.
Yeah. So if those people who are in the know in terms of how real bond markets are formed and how sort of money markets are formed, that we'll probably need to get some expert on to talk about that one day in the future. But in very practical terms, banks will source their money from a combination of markets, including the RBA, and potentially including offshore. And a very big component of it for some of the bigger banks is also their deposits. So what the bank's trying to do from a net interest margin point of view is trying to maximise that margin, because that's profitability, in addition to obviously growing the size of their loan book is profitability and minimising the risk of bad debts. Now, so when Jim asked the questions about when those mortgage repayments actually go up on the back of the cash rate moving, you've got to think about the RBA as effectively being the market maker when it comes to roughly what the cost of money is. Now, over 20 or 30 or 40 odd years of watching the money markets, there are times when money is very cheap offshore, and you do see some lenders, not necessarily banks, but some lenders look to sourcing their money offshore. We saw a lot of that happen just before the GFC, when money was really cheap in America under Greenspan, and ultimately that led to the arrival of businesses like Rams and potentially Aussie and Wizard in terms of being able to source money and then obviously on lend that. So they weren't banks, but they were certainly credit providers. So the combination of all of those things determines the price we pay. So as retail consumers, when interest rates go up from a variable point of view, our repayments go up. And there is what's referred to, sometimes we refer to it as bracket creep when we think about our marginal tax rates. There is obviously a larger dollar value of money that's collected by the banks when interest rates are higher. And where does all of that money go? Well, some of it goes into higher profits. But in terms of where they are sourcing that money from, there is a liability that's being created by the banks for where they're getting that money, and they've got to pay that money back. So we'll start with the very basics. So let's say deposit money coming in. Now, if you've got money at call, usually you get a very poor interest rate return on that money. But that bank is lending out that money. They're on selling your money at a higher marginal rate, and that goes towards their net margin rate, and that's obviously their margin. When you've got term deposits, same sort of thing. At the moment, you might get term deposits around 1.5% to 2%, and ultimately the banks are selling that money at 4.5%, etc. And then when they need to source additional funds, they're obviously going to the RBA or the money markets to source those funds. When it comes to fixed rates, they are using the bond market or in terms of buying parcels of money at a certain price point on the bond yield curve, anything from 3 to 5 to 7 to 10. And so ultimately your fixed rate is determined by the banks or the Treasury buying that amount of money, working out the cost of that money, and then on selling that for the margin.
So let's summarise a bit here, folks, because ultimately the bank is trying to make a profit. So what happens is the cash rate, when I was at 0.1, that's what the RBA was charging the banks for the money that they lent them. It's now up at 2.35. So they've moved the cost that is being passed on to the bank that they have to pay back to the Reserve Bank. So therefore their costs increase. Stick around till question 4 because this is kind of relevant, but their costs will increase. And so then they just have to pass that on to the borrower. And even if you think back to the 90s, Ben, when interest rates were at 17%, when you talk about the deposit holders are actually partly funding some of it as well. Back then, 17% interest rates, you go, whoa, that's a lot. Well, your money in the bank was getting 13 to 15% on it as well. So it was there was still a net margin that wasn't exorbitant, but it was just a different time. So they get their funding, largely speaking, from a couple of enthusiastic amateurs, from the deposits that they take from the people, the money that the RBA gives them, and if they are able to find some arbitrage opportunities offshore where they can get some funding, they munge all that up together, offer a product out to the customer, and that customer then pays. So if interest rates are set by the RBA, it's largely because of the source of the funding that they're receiving, and so the cost of the funding is determined through monetary policy on what the RBA does. So therefore, that's where it goes. So to answer your question, Jim, some of the interest rate increase is actually flowing through to the bottom line for the shareholders, but equally, a fair bit of that is actually flowing back to the original source of funds, which in this case was the RBA. So to Ben's point, the RBA is the market maker and the banks are the market taker. That is because they set the benchmark through which that cost is actually passed on. So I think it's a really good question. I wonder if a lot of people have thought about it, Ben, but it's actually the Reserve Bank the Commonwealth Bank of Australia then split back in 1959 so that they had a banking enterprise, and then the central bank split off to be the Reserve Bank of Australia. They used to be one. And then from that point, the bank went down a path of becoming a commercial enterprise, which they listed on the stock market, and now they have to get a return for the shareholders. But they were once one. They are no longer one, so that the Reserve Bank is charged with the charter of implementing monetary policy on behalf of the government, lend the cash to the banks, lend it out to the market, so that we have the multiplier effect. And if rates go up, the banks have got to pay some more.
Yeah, and in theory, the Reserve Bank aren't sort of in the business of making profits, but they're also in the business of ensuring stability in the marketplace as well. So from their point of view, their job is to try and provide. I mean, if you think about the mandate of the RBA, it's about lower unemployment, so higher employment, and also better standards of living. And they do that through the flow of money into the economy to try and get it stimulated, and to also retract that money when they need to slow it down if inflation gets out of hand. So they need to keep inflation between 2 and 3%. But all other sources of money, just think about it like this. When you're borrowing offshore, there is a business trying to make profit from that money that they're lending to you. So they've also got to source that money from a cheaper source. So there's always a market on both the buyer and seller side, and everyone's trying to take a clip of the ticket along the way. And that's when you do see these sort of financial markets. And make no mistake, everyone thinks about iron ore or oil as the biggest commodity in the world. It is nothing compared to the money markets. The biggest commodity in the world is the money markets, whether it be bonds, whether it be exchange, financial, sort of currency exchanges, and the margins that are made between exchanges of money and the fees. And it absolutely makes oil look like a third world commodity compared to the amount of money that's moving around the system at any one time. And that's why if you break that money management system or that money market, you have global financial crises in terms of that. And if people don't pay their debt obligations, that's when obviously the risk to the stability of the financial system breaks down. But the bottom line is, retail banks will pay for money. They'll have to pay a margin on that money. They're also then going to lend that money out, and the RBA sets that money market, and we all follow it from a variable point of view, from the cash rate. And the fixed rates are set really by the bond markets and the 3 and 5 and 10-year bond yields that play out in that space.
There you go, folks. Good question, Jim. I reckon that was a good question for everyone. For some people, for a refresher. For some people, new information. But as we move to an environment where we will continue to get a few more couple maybe interest rate rises, depending on how big they are. It's good for us to have that in the back of our mind, how it's actually working, who's getting the cash, and why the RBA wields so much power when it comes to them declaring the cash rate on the first Tuesday of every month. The next question is from Beck. This question is, what do we do now we're on maternity leave? Let's have a listen to this now, Ben.
Hi guys, hoping you could talk a little bit about maternity leave. I have only recently started listening to your podcast. I'm I think, about 5 new episodes deep and 78 previous episodes deep. We had a baby preterm, so I've been driving to and from the hospital, and you guys have been keeping me sane. Our preterm baby meant that our maternity leave situation started 15 weeks earlier than we had planned. And while that hasn't financially impacted us in terms of our life management, it has put a big bump in the road for our property investment goals. We have one investment property. We successfully accessed $225,000 worth of equity from that property and have that in the bank, all done and sitting. We also have $75,000 worth of savings on top of that, so $300K in the bank, ready to go. But I'm now on half-pay maternity leave for the next approximately 6 months. We're just wondering what the best course of action is now in terms of, do we sit and wait, or is there something that we should be doing or could be doing even though we're on maternity leave? Thanks, guys.
Good question, Beck. So you obviously had a pathway that you were going on, and because of circumstances around your family, the maternity leave's been brought forward. So what does that actually mean for your ability to buy an investment property? Based on the information we've got here, Ben, it seems like there's a healthy amount of equity that can be accessed at 225. So 80% of that is close to $1 million, obviously servicing.
No, it's out by the looks of it. There's 300 sitting there ready to roll, right? That's 75 in savings plus the 3.
Well, 75 could act as a wonderful buffer, given that on maternity leave, half pay. So it becomes a question. There's 3 things when you're buying property that you need to think about. You got to have money to buy, you got to have money to service the loan, and then you got to have money to act as a buffer. They're your 3 core pillars when you're buying investment property, because if you have a buffer, this ensures you're never forced to sell if the buffer is sufficient, and then you can play the long game. So you can do all the fluctuations on balance sheet and do all the fluctuations in circumstances, as Beck's just described, just one circumstance in their world. But if you get those 3 things lined up, so based on what we've got here, the only thing we don't know, Ben, and you've spoke to the team, so you can talk to that point, but the only thing we don't know is around the second point. So they've got money to buy, unless they want to buy 2 or 3 million, but they look like they've got money to buy. They've definitely got some money to act as a buffer. So the big question is, can they service the loan, Ben?
Yeah, so Beck, obviously, great question. Thanks for it. First and foremost, hope Bubs is all good and healthy and everything like that. That goes without saying. I mean, obviously, our health is our wealth. So hopefully all that's going well. And now you're able to sort of focus on building out for you and your family, growing family, obviously having the baby as well. So this does become a question of, what will the banks do? What will the credit policy be within each of the lenders with regards to going down to a lower level of income for a period of 6 months? Now, there might be some lenders out there who will take a firm view that they don't want to include anything more than the half pay that you're earning during that 6-month period. But an investment savvy broker will know that there are still a lot of lenders out there who will have a look at this case on its merits. And the case on the merits is going to be, how long have you been employed in that particular company? How long have you been employed in that particular industry? And then they're going to be basically looking at, are you going to be returning to work? And if you are returning to work, they potentially want to get confidence that you are returning to work via a letter from your employee, and also what expected employers, and also expected what sort of salary you're going to return on. So a lot of people who go through a maternity program may change their future expectations around work, where they're going from full-time down to part-time, or they change roles. So if you're going back to your same job with your same salary expectations, there's a few things they're going to look at. They're going to look at that and get that letter. The other thing they're also going to do is have a look at your savings position and how are you going to be able to trade through that period before you return to full-time work. So in other words, if we want a credit department inside a bank or lender to assess the borrowing servicing at the full income, then they're the sort of things that we need. In addition to that, they're going to want to seek some comfort around being able to, as I said, manage through that term of the next 6 months. Have you got enough buffer? What Bryce was saying, point number 3, around that buffer. So all in all going well, there are lenders out there who would look at your situation, very much so, and potentially assess it at the highest level of borrowing power possible, getting those things, those comfort levels in place. In addition to that, we then need to look at what your borrowing power is and what type of property you're going to buy, because we're going to also add the rental income on top of that. And in some cases, depending on how much you're going to borrow, given you've got the 225,000 outside of your 75,000 buffer that Bryce was talking about, that's also going to potentially have what we call a negative gearing impact. So there might be some negative gearing add backs that a lender might also look at as part of that overall servicing story. So this is another good example of the lender that you may be with. You've had a conversation on the phone with their home loan centre, and they're just not really interested. They're sort of saying, come back after you've returned to full-time work, but right now you're on maternity leave, we're not interested. That is not necessarily going to be the case when you shop around. So again, investment savvy mortgage broker should be able to give you some guidance around that, should be able to help you work out your short-term numbers, and also what areas that we would mitigate. If there were questions from the credit advisor, we would have a look at the credit policy of each of those banks in terms of who would accept your income as full income, and that's how it plays out. So this is another reason why, with 45 odd strong lenders out there in the marketplace, coming back to Jim's question as well, right? How margins get squeezed and how we get competitive rates is competition. And so having a healthy lending market is actually good for consumers. And this is the same for you, Beck, in terms of choices. So don't just be restricted by the idea that your lender, because they said no, that other lenders would say no.
Hey, Beck, the other thing to think about is getting some tax advice, because if you are the scenario that Ben described before, where you are returning back to a similar role with a similar income, there is almost like a secondment where you've got a lower taxable income whilst your fixed cost would remain constant. So therefore, there may be some opportunity for you to get additional tax benefits from that as well. So have a chat to your accountant to see if that's appropriate for you as well. So, but I guess it really comes down to risk profile here, whether the limited information we have here actually translates into you having a strong buffer and feeling that sense of peace, and the fact that you are going through a busy time in your life when you do welcome a child into the world. You've got one investment property. It's clear that this is a pathway that you want to do, and you could be buying now in an environment when competition is, I'm not going to say non-existing, because that's not true, but it's lower. You've got less people fighting for the properties that in 10, 12, 13, 15 years time you want to be owning. So Beck, at face value, if you can satisfy the second point that I talked to, which is the money to service the loan, and then that flows into your buffer and you're comfortable with that, and you're talking to an investment savvy mortgage broker who can sort out the lending for you, chances are there's potentially an opportunity there for you. So let us know if that was helpful, Beck. Now, Ben, one of the things I forgot to mention at the top, and I probably haven't mentioned for the past couple, is anyone who leaves a question for you and I on SpeakPipe, we give them our Start and Build course. So all they need to do is reach out to us and say, you read out my question, we will give you a course, which is, it's a $497 course, Ben, so it's nothing to be sneezed at. So if anyone's listening to this and go, hang on a second, you read out my question 3 or 4 weeks ago and I forgot to say it, let us know. We'll honour that. So you and I love these questions where our community says, this is what's going on for me at the coalface, and so we want to incentivise you to do that. So everyone that we've read out will get that course. Everyone we've read out in the last sort of 2 or 3 months where I haven't mentioned that, we'll honour the course as well. Hey, this next one is from Melanie Ben. It's a question about cross-collateralising properties. And is it terminal, Ben? Can you get out of the cross-collateralisation prison, or is it a warrant that you've signed for the rest of your life? Let's have a listen.
Hi guys, it's Mel here. Big fan. I've listened to all of your episodes, and my dad and I even purchased your educational series, listened to all them, and we bought a investment property together. So thank you for that. On my own property journey, I have my principal place of residence, which is an apartment in Sydney, and I recently just purchased another apartment. And as you guys have said, sometimes the banks go and cross-collateralize without telling you, and that's exactly what's happened. So I've gone back and re-listened to your episodes to educate myself again. So many gold nuggets in there to listen to. And I've gone to my bank and had the discussion. And because of the particular loan I had set up, it's through a defence bank. I am a member of the Army. I actually couldn't take the equity out of it, and cross-collateralisation was the only way to buy this second investment property on my own portfolio. So my options now are to either save up a deposit and go ahead and buy another property and do it the proper way where I'm not cross-collateralizing, or I can try and uncross them now with a savvy mortgage broker, as you say. Or option 3, if this is even an option, and my question is, can I, with 2 properties cross-collateralized on the second property, take out that equity, liquidize it, and then get another property? Or once you start the cross-collateralization, is that it? Any advice you could give would be great. Do I uncross now? Do I start a new line and have one part of my portfolio cross and the other part not? Any advice would be great. Thank you.
What a great question, Mel. A couple of things there, Ben. Do it the proper way. Oh, we like that, but it's probably more the preferred way, because there's plenty of people who've got crossed assets that are probably still fine. But Ben, is it terminal? Are you stuck in this lane forever, or can we change?
You may be quarantined in that lane for a period of time, subject to the criteria in which you got that original loan and the appetite for other lenders in terms of taking over that loan. So let me sort of unpack that a little bit more. If it is a defence loan, there may be a situation where Melanie was able to get a higher loan to value ratio without paying LMI. And so that has allowed her to release that equity. That might be, and part of the condition on that from the bank's point of view might be that they have forced a cross securitisation arrangement as part of their credit policy to be able to lend, say, up to 95% or to release equity out to that 95%. Not sure. We don't know the full details there. But if that is the case, coming back to Melanie's question around, if you've got 2 properties cross-collateralised, and try and say that quickly.
Wow, mate, we've been trying that for 408 episodes to say that quickly.
So we always say cross-securitized, but cross-collateralized. You can still release equity from that property. Now, remembering that you are releasing that equity from the combination of the 2 properties. So that is not something you can't do, generally speaking. Again, it's up to the appetite of the bank and what your loan to value ratios will be. So you can keep taking equity out against those 2 properties. But the big reason why we encourage people to uncross is that there are also other moving parts attached to that. Now, you might tap out with that particular defence lender in terms of your borrowing power, and you are now sort of in that mortgage prison with that particular lender as I said, for a moment in time. You may be quarantined in there until the situation changes whereby you need more income. If interest rates are going up and your borrowing power is going down and you can't move out of there, and so you're in that current situation. But to answer the very basic question here is, yes, you can continue to release equity out against 2 properties that may be cross-securitized, but you are limiting your movements and your flexibility as you move forward. And of course, any time that you can get out of that quarantining type arrangement where it's limiting your choice is always a good opportunity to get out. And it's always a good opportunity to ensure that your properties are uncrossed in terms of flexibility. And, we've talked about a great example is if one property has actually gone up in value and the other one's gone down slightly, and they are crossed, well, then your net equity position release is actually neutral. Whereas if that other property that had gone down a bit, the bank's got that security separate and it's got the property that's got some equity in it that you want to release, that is another reason in terms of the moving parts on the chessboard and how we like to organise your structural affairs when it comes to setting up your property assets and also the lending attached to them.
Mel, the reason we talk about an investment savvy mortgage broker is for this, because you can get a borrowing capacity anywhere. You can do it online. You can fill in application forms online. So borrowing capacity is super simple. It's the borrowing strategy that you want, right? So if you're going to buy an investment property, one investment property in your life, and you've got your home, for example, and it's cross securitized or cross collateralised, it's probably no big deal. You only plan to buy one. But if you believe what Ben and I said in the first 100 episodes, that property investing is a game of finance just as much as it is a game of bricks and mortar, and Ben sort of alluded to the analogy that we talked about before about being a game of chess, thinking 2 or 3 moves in advance. The goal, if you do want to buy 2 or 3, is clearly to increase your options. So therefore, just re-listen to what Ben just said and the reasons why. So you'd want to uncross. So we've had plenty of scenarios over the journey, having done this now, I'm entering my 24th year, where I've seen lots of people go, okay, this is what's happened. The bank's gone into default mode. To Ben's point around the defence bank, you might have some limitations there, but just stay broadly here, where they then have to go, all right, before I buy my next one, I've got to go through the process of uncrossing. I've seen, 9, 10, 11 properties, which takes time, and it takes understanding, and it takes a bit of unwinding to do before you get there. But ultimately, if you can get that uncrossed, and just for those people who are hearing this for the first time, it's just, Ben hinted at it, one loan and the bank takes 2 securities or multiple securities for the one loan. Whereas the idea is if you're buying an investment property, you've got a loan against it for 80%, and the balance of 20% plus costs comes from a separate securitized loan against another asset, so that you do have them separated. So it's a good question, Melanie. Not enough to get super detailed on the answer for you, but hopefully enough to give you a sense of what your next step is. And that is, you do need to talk to an investment savvy mortgage broker. So if you want to talk to one of our team, reach out to us. We'll connect you up so that you can have that conversation, because our team understands borrowing strategy incredibly well, mentored by Ben from a very long time ago. So if you want help with that, we can help you. But if you have your own investment savvy mortgage broker, go and speak to them and get some advice, and get them to show you, draw some pictures, get them to, so that you can fully understand the structure that's being set up and that's being suggested, because that's the game. And if you don't understand that bit, you're outsourcing the understanding. We always say outsource the execution to someone else, no problem, but do not outsource the understanding, because you need to have that within yourself, Ben.
Yeah, so jump onto the Empower Wealth website if that's for you. Hey, Mel, I also want to finish off talking about the property that you bought with your dad. So remember that the bank will take a security, but in this particular case, because you're both going to be on title, what about releasing equity of that property? So what would have to happen here, and I'm not saying that this is what you need to do, but this is for the benefit of the community. If you were looking to release equity out of that particular property that you bought jointly, you would have to go back for servicing together. So both incomes would have to be assessed on that particular property. And if you were to release some funds out of that, and your dad wasn't necessarily interested in partaking in what that future release of that money would be, and this is whether it's a father, daughter, or any type of relationship where it could be best friends doing this, I would encourage the father to be considering getting some type of legal agreement in place that if that money was released, where it does require joint and several liability attached to it, that there might be some type of financial agreement put in place there, a legal agreement that just says who carries that ultimate risk and that liability on that particular additional release. The other option here that usually comes about as the property journey keeps moving is the mum and dads are trying to help people get a leg up. And so over time, another consideration may be that you look to buy out their share of that property as well, and then ultimately take full ownership of it. So rather than thinking about buying an additional property on top of that, you could potentially come back and swallow up the remaining 50% or whatever the outstanding ownership equity that you don't hold, the ownership value you don't hold in there as well. Now, we don't know that backstory there, so your dad might be looking at this as being a pure investment play for him as well. So that will also play out as well. But that is also going to potentially impact your borrowing power because you do have that joint and several liability with your father as well on that other debt. So that could impact in terms of your future borrowing. So hence, coming back to the point, this would all be discussed in detail and with your investment savvy broker to be able to sort of pull all that together and give you your options and to show if we take this course, if we take this course, if we take this course, this is how we would get there, or this is what we can do today versus this is what we might be able to do tomorrow.
Mel, great question. Ben delivered the gold there. I'd encourage you to go and listen to that a couple of times because there was a lot in there, but there's some really fundamental things that any property investor should be across. So good one. Well done for getting on the property ladder, the multiple property ladder. You are a very, very small percentage of the population that does that. So you should be super pumped with that. Well done. Last question for today, Ben, is from Jean. Jean's got a question about a little old tax that's happening across the border up in Queensland. Let's have a little listen.
Hi, I'm an investor in New South Wales. My name is Jane, and given the news out of Queensland lately, is it time for all investors to sell up their property in Queensland and get out? Because it is really unfair for us to also have to pay tax to Queensland on properties that we have outside of Queensland. Thank you.
Jane, good question. More and more people are starting to understand the impact of what's being mooted up there in Queensland. And before I throw it to you, Ben, the scariest part about this question here for everyone is if you're uninformed about the detail, it becomes a mystery. And then the mystery is where the uncertainty lives, and the uncertainty is where the anxiety lives. Because we have looked under the bonnet on this particular proposed change, and there are people on one end of the spectrum who are really affected. The other end of the spectrum is nothing to see here, and then everything in between, right? But the outliers at the top end are not the majority. There are people who are impacted, and it is material and significant, and they should take some serious advice about what they should do. But from our analysis, Ben, and we're going to encourage you to lean into your licensed professional advisor to make sure that you double check for your own circumstances. But from our analysis, there are a range of options that people have. So you want to talk more to this, but I just wanted to set that up as being super important to be. The monster under the bed is that there was no monster under the bed. It's thought of the monster under the bed. So the thought of the monster here is what's getting a lot of people. So if you unpack and get the detail, that helps inform you to whether or not this question is something you should do or whether it's something that you shouldn't do. So, Ben.
Yeah, there's so many interesting and somewhat scary elements to this, Bryce, because the Queensland government was asked to release their modelling on this last week, and they're refusing to release modelling. And we suspect that's because they haven't really done a lot of detailed modelling on this. So they're estimating it'll affect about 10,000 property investors and will generate around $20 million of additional tax revenue for the government. Now, the numbers from that point of view, considering if it does include commercial and it also includes private owned property outside of investment property, so i.e. holiday homes and second type properties and so forth, they really have no clue, right? And ultimately they don't want to disclose that in terms of just how many people are affected. But to your point, there are over 2.5 million property investments out there, and you're probably thinking that there's probably over 1.5 million investors in the property space. So we are only talking about that 5 to 10% of investors who have multiple properties or have ownerships, of interest in Queensland and also interest outside of Queensland. But it does cut through to a more critical question, and that is that when governments interfere in free markets, it creates clear uncertainty about what's next and what they're going to do. And what we are seeing from people's reaction, like Jean, and all of the feedback that I'm getting as the chair of PICA through our membership base, is that people are really fearful of this and they're untrusting in terms of what's next. And that is making them generally cautious in terms of their next step. Now, what we are saying is we can go by what we've experienced in the past. So let's talk about negative gearing. In 1995, the Keating-Hawke government...
85.
85, did I say my bad? 85, changed negative gearing. So they banned negative gearing, and it literally lasted 2 years because the unintended consequences was the economic impact. And that wasn't just felt in higher rents. It was actually just felt in the fact that they worked out pretty quickly that construction and the broader economy is impacted, human capital mobility is impacted, and they repealed that legislation, and the world just got on with what it was doing, and investors had confidence to come back into that market. Fast forward to New South Wales, around 2005 to 2007, I believe it was, where again, on the back of a pretty significant property boom from 2001 to 2004-ish, everyone was sort of saying property investors are artificially inflating prices in Sydney, blah, 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 in the short term. And they introduced a premium or an additional surcharge for stamp duty if you bought investment properties in New South Wales. So what did the investor do? The investor says, right, okay, we understand your intent here. You don't want property investors in your state, so we'll go and spend our investment dollars elsewhere. And again, once again, we saw construction fall off, job growth start to slow, and they don't understand the impact of, these medium and high density and just all the general construction that goes on when it comes to overall economic activity in a free market. So that is the critical play here. We think that once the Queensland government actually assesses the unintended consequences and the fact that we've said that this is the great Queensland renters tax, every economist is pointing to it's likely going to increase rents. And from our point of view, when you are making your independent assessment of your current situation, if you're talking around the sort of $1,000 or $2,000 extra, a lot of our clients are saying that's a cost of doing business, and they're proceeding, aren't they, Bryce? They're proceeding with investing in Queensland, and as per their portfolio, because it's going to come down to case by case. The people who might be feeling a $8,000 to $25,000 increase in their tax, they are materially impacted by that number. And they may be in a situation to sort of say, well, that would encourage me to divest of my Queensland interests. Or if they're highly weighted in Queensland, that might say, well, and they've got a significant independent asset in New South Wales or Victoria, they may then judge that as sort of saying, if I can't recover those costs, then I may divest out of that single asset. And this is why it's very difficult to sort of make some big, broad statement here, other than what we do know. And what we do know is that you are increasing the cost of running that investment property and running potentially multiple properties. So when costs do increase, we have a couple of options. We divest of the asset because the risk-adjusted return is no longer worth the risk, so we will divest. Or we will pass on some or all of those costs into the marketplace. Now, there's some debate out there to sort of say, yeah, sure, how are you going to do that? You can't just automatically lift rents. Well, I'll tell you in my What's Baking Property News in a minute, just how challenged the Queensland and certainly the Brisbane rental market is at the moment. But it does come back to the point, and you and I were talking off air about this, Bryce, around over the last decade, so from effectively 2012 to 2022, inflation has grown by around 25.9%. Rents across Australia have only grown by around 12.5%. So we haven't been keeping up with inflation. Now, there is a reason for that. If you look at also that same trend, interest rates were trending down. They're our biggest cost. Interest rates are usually our biggest cost when it comes to holding properties. So as the interest rate or the cost of holding the property was going down, there really wasn't any great pressure on landlords to actually increase the rents. Now, if there were additional maintenance or costs that they're doing, there might have been a small incremental increase. But what we are now seeing is, obviously, rates are increasing at record levels. That is increasing the cost base for all property investors across the country. And en masse, we are effectively saying to ourselves, well, we need to pass on some of those costs. And so it's happening not only just in Queensland, but rents are going up across Australia at a time where rental vacancies are super tight. So we come back to what we said last week, is that the last thing you want to be doing is taking private investors out of the market, because at some point in time, it's going to take you a long time to actually build that government stock that's needed. So you shouldn't be disincentivizing us. You should be incentivizing us to actually want to invest in your state. And if you do that, you create the essential minimum number of properties that we need, which is usually around 2 to 3% vacancy rates. If you've got that, you've got people mobility, you've got job mobility, people will be able to move interstate, and also that immigration coming in as well. So that's my little rant again, Bryce, and I'll keep ranting on in terms of what that means. So, Jean, I wouldn't say it's an automatic, that's it. We need to get out of Queensland. That's not the message here. It is a case-by-case situation based on your circumstances and your current exposure to Queensland and the value of the asset that you're going to buy in Queensland and the value of your assets that you've got currently in other states and territories. But the broader story here is it's very likely to reduce the rental stock in Queensland over time, and it's very likely, almost inevitable, that you're going to see rents increase in Queensland significantly to recoup some of those costs when the market is telling you that you have a rental crisis already in that particular location.
And I flagged when we talked to Jim's question in the first one, Ben, about, well, the banks get an increased cost, so they pass that on to us in the form of interest rates. You don't have the same mechanism for property investors. There is a lag, but it's still talking to the same point. When your expenses go up, because as a property investor, you're a business, so you're looking to look at your costs there. So the other thing too, folks, to remember is that it relies on other jurisdictions, so outside of Queensland, providing information to the Queensland government to help them implement that. So that's at a cost to those other jurisdictions. So they might have something to say about that. And equally, the federal government all of a sudden now has a non-grandfathered, without notice increase in costs that now is the burden of the federal government, because they are now giving out more tax rebates because of that. So the point is there's a lot to go here. So to your question, Jean, there is no blanket answer here. Right? Someone who has very little exposure to other states and buying into Queensland, they would just be paying, if they've got their principal place of residence somewhere else, land tax exempt principal place of residence, and they're buying only in Queensland at the moment, well, you're only going to pay the tax that you would have paid anyway. So it's not impacting you. Other end of the spectrum is someone who has multiple holdings in New South Wales, our busiest and most populated city, which comes with the most expensive prices in most parts of the state. So if they're holding multiple properties across that state, and then they hold one property in Queensland, that is a material impact for them. And that is something that they would need to get structural advice around what is best. Because don't forget, if they sell into Queensland, they've owned it for 20 years, there's a big capital gains tax bill that's coming as well. So you've got to work out, is the capital gains tax bill larger than the amount of tax that I'm going to pay? So there is no way that there is a blanket rule to this. And you will become bored by the fact that Ben and I say that you just got to run the numbers, because the numbers will set you free. The monster under the bed is only there because of the thought in your head. If you have visibility around what the actual impact is for you, then you get to choose one or two or three scenarios that you can, or you design one or two or three scenarios that you can then consider in the cold light of day to the bottom line. So, Jean, good question. You may be frustrated the fact that we didn't give you an answer that was specific to you, but there just is no one size fits all here, Ben.
No, and we've got some data that we'll be releasing on the back of the sentiment survey that we're hopeful that a lot of people, we've got a record number of responses to that sentiment survey. I am privy to that data, but I will be holding it back because it is a PIPA initiative. So we'll be working with our sister association in terms of releasing that data. And as soon as we know that it's public, you'll be the first to know about it on the Property Couch podcast in terms of how we've asked really important questions about sentiment. We talk a lot about what's actually happening in the numbers, but if all of these government measures are changing investor sentiment, that is going to be problematic. So that is, in terms of their intent. So I'm really keen to be basically showing that to government and showing that to our community in terms of people are quite fearful of the way in which the governments are treating investors. smart investors are still investing. And it's probably a good little sidebar here, Bryce, to sort of, I'll tell you what I'm super proud of at the moment, mate, and that is we're going through, obviously, these uncertain times. It's another cycle. You and I have been through 3 or 4 of these bigger cycles.
Mm-hmm.
The investors who have been there, done that, and have 1 or 2 properties, they're actually contacting us about going again.
Yep.
I'm really proud of them in terms of they get it. Where others are fearful, they see opportunity. And they're acting on that. They're actually reaching out proactively. Their plan says that they may have bought another one next year, but they feel like this is a good opportunity to come in to get a great asset when the market's a little bit flatter. So I want to just acknowledge those investors who don't have that challenged mindset that the new investor sometimes has, that novice sometimes has. I mean, as you said, you're looking. I just settled on a property in August that we bought during this time. So it's just a reminder to those people. And if you are a novice, just look at what the pros are doing. What are the pros adding to their portfolio during this time? You would like to think that most of them are. And so just a shout out to those people. And if you are a little bit nervous and sitting on the sidelines, just again, think about what the pros are doing. What are they getting out? Are they cashing out? Or are they executing on opportunities, whether it be in this jurisdiction or other states and territories around the country, because they want to take the opportunity to buy a solid asset that's going to perform over the very long period of time.
You're talking to my life hack, Ben, so I'll get to that shortly. The last thing I want to say here is why do we have this confidence? So those people listening to you, Ben, going, "Oh, there he goes, the property prosperity preacher again." Why do you have the confidence? Well, in the plan, we put 1.5% of the purchase price as a contingency to cover maintenance, rates, and a bunch of other things that are associated. So let's put some numbers on that. $600,000 purchase, that's $9,000 a year. So, and each and every year that gets factored in, right? So it's important to give people the reason why, because we've planned for it. We put a contingency in place. And that's why we say for some people, if it's not material, sure, paying extra sucks. Like, that's irrefutable. But if you have a tax rebate, so you get minimum 30 cents back for the extra dollar, then you have an opportunity to pass, for the better part of the last decade, you haven't passed it on through rent because interest rates have been so low. Well, now your costs are increasing, so you will be forced to do that. And you have a buffer in place to factor that. That's where the confidence comes from, Ben, rather than it just being a bunch of words to say, yeah, let's stay optimistic in all times. Hey, thanks to Jim, thanks to Beck, thank you to Mel, and also thank you to Jean for your wonderful questions. Hopefully they've helped you. Just a reminder to reach out to us. We'll give you a copy of our Start and Build course for free. Hopefully that encourages you. If you're listening to this thinking, well, I've got a question that I want to ask, go to thepropertycouch.com.au. On the homepage, you don't have to go anywhere else but stay on the homepage. On the far right-hand side, there's a little yellow button. Click that, and all of a sudden you can start recording your question. It will come to me. I'll hear it. And if it's appropriate for all of our audience and not too specific to you, we will make sure that we get it on the show. Hey, my life hack today, Ben, is to your earlier point. I want everyone to be an observer in the property market right now. I want them to have a look at what properties are going up for sale, and just do a little check. Is this an A grade property or is this a C grade property? So that you can see, are you seeing lots of listings? If you're driving past and you're seeing a complex, so the types of properties that we say not to buy, Ben, are you seeing 2 for sale signs up? Are you seeing 3 for sale signs up within those particular properties versus the ones around the corner that are in detached housing or small boutique townhouses or something that plays to the investment grade nature that we've been talking to for some time? Because what this will do is it will help you separate headline from the actual coalface of the market. And I got this, GFC was the first crisis I went through, Ben, as a property investor. And I was living on the Gold Coast. I haven't told this story for a while. I have done it in the past, so forgive me for those who've been on a couple of laps. I was seeing on the Gold Coast C-grade stock in distressed sales, multiple properties going up. But I was observing that none of the good stuff was going up for sale then. And so it just goes to show that if you do have, the fundamentals of buying a property, you've got money to buy it, money to service it, and a buffer in place to make sure you're never in a forced selling situation ever, well, those properties don't come up for sale. And if they do, there's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people sort of weeding through the chaff to get to that one, because it stands out as something that you want to get. You mentioned I am looking to buy right now. I am, and I'm waiting for the right one to come up. And as soon as it does, I'm going to pounce. So I think that's important. So my life hack today is, crew, be an observer. Watch what's going on. Watch the for sale signs in your suburb. Watch the for sale signs as you're going to work or going about your business or going down to the shops. Just keep a keen eye. If you see a for sale sign, form of view. Is it an A or B or a C property? Are there multiple properties in the same area? Are people within the same demographic? Therefore, they're affected by exactly the same. Try and put some of the principles that we've been talking to for such a long time into reality, because cliche warning, but when the tide goes out, you see who's been swimming naked. The tide is going out a little bit, Ben, so we get to see who's been swimming naked. We get to see who is vulnerable, who doesn't have a buffer, who has to sell, who hasn't made the right decisions. So folks, couches, let's make sure that you are the ones that are actually seeing this as an opportunity to learn, as opposed to an opportunity to feel the anxiety that comes from the headlines that are coming, because they're still coming. And that is the difference between the professional property investor and the amateur who rides the bumps of the headlines. Ben, what's making property news?
Well, there's a few things making property news, Bryce. Earlier this week, we saw an article come out from realestate.com.au with the headline, "Ludicrous. New tax will gut the Queensland rental market and see tenants paying dearly, experts warn." And that article is obviously quoting Cameron Cusher, who's one of the heads of research at
No lightweight.
PropTrack, no lightweight there. And they've also got some quotes from me in regards to wearing my hat of the Property Investors Council of Australia. So, look, that just talks about that this will impose more pressure on higher rents, is the conclusion from all experts who are looking at it in a objective way, or as objective as they can. As you know, I do have a bias about this, but again, the government's own website shows a 330% increase in taxes for the example that they've used there. So that's a big one. I thought was also quite a good bit of research, and this is why it's quite important. We did see Eliza Owen, head of research at CoreLogic, produce a Brisbane rental crisis in 5 charts. So we'll also put some links to the show notes for this one here. But in summary, yes, the portion of income required to service rents is going higher, sort of coming back to the sort of June 2008 levels. In terms of that, we're seeing that the median weekly rents have gone from around 468 to around 530 in a short term time. Rental vacancies, which is the other key measure for us in terms of vacancy stock, is now down around that 1%, sitting at almost record low areas. In terms of rolling 28-day counts of total rental listings across Greater Brisbane, is also well below its 5-year average. And then ultimately, you're seeing the level of new listings in terms of investor listings is actually also declining. So it's just all pointing to a really tighter rental market in Queensland. And we also noticed that the government in Queensland is looking to do a summit, a housing summit, of which they're bringing in.
You've been invited, Ben?
Well, I'm hoping we'll get invited, Bryce, but at this stage, in the list of names that they're quoting there, there's a lot of property people in there, which is good. There's obviously Antonia, our great friend from the Real Estate Institute of Queensland. There's obviously a lot of government departments. There's a lot of homeless and shelter and welfare people. They absolutely need a voice. But you know whose voice is missing, Bryce?
Mate, it couldn't possibly be the property investor's voice, Ben.
The voice of the property investor, Bryce. Why not? Like, why? I mean, obviously, you've got all these peak associations that represent in the industry interests, which is great. But what about the property investor? What about the landlords? What about those private those private investors who provide long-term private rental accommodation? We do need a seat at the table. So if anyone's passionate about this topic like I am, just go and tweet or put on Twitter, get PICA along to the property forum, the housing summit, because we've got a voice too. And if you want to listen to what our investors are telling you in terms of what they're going to do, we would love to be able to share that with government so they can make a more informed decision and ultimately repeal the Great Queensland Renters Tax, which is commonly referred to as the increase in land tax in Queensland. That would be also a good story. So plenty happening in the property space, Bryce, but very much focused on this Queensland tax grab. So it's very interesting to see what will play out in that space.
Very good, Ben. Thanks for that. The more voice that you can share, folks, it's not just for property investors in Queensland. It's going to affect everyone, as we talked about. So, mate, as we wrap up the show, we can pause and reflect on Her Majesty the Queen, Ben, who left us this week after an incredible reign. So depending on where you are as a royalist compared to a Republican, you've got to be only full of admiration for how she held herself for such a long time, and particularly the incredible stoicism that she showed through the pandemic, and to be a world leader who was saying, keep calm, keep calm. So clearly the Property Couch tips our hat to a wonderful woman, a wonderful leader, and all the best to King Charles as he takes the throne, Ben.
Yeah, no, that's right. And obviously next Thursday we have a national public holiday, so I'm sure we'll have a little bit more to say about, some of the great things that she was involved with. But yes, for someone who lived through those generations of uncertainty, Second World War, right through to, lots of things, so many world leader changes, incredible woman, and someone who, we can still be proud of, whether we have Republican views or whether we have monarchy views as well. So, our respects go out to the Queen.
Well said, Ben. Hey, it was a great show. Thanks for coming off the bench and for being a good sport at the top of the show, Ben. You're always a great sport. And I can only say one thing, Ben, and I think you'd appreciate this. On behalf of every football supporter around the country, go Swannies.
No, do I get right of reply? All I can say is knowledge is empowering, Bryce, but only if you act on it. And come on, Pies, act on it.
Nice. See you next week, folks.
Hey guys, Bryce here again. Just want to catch you before you go and let you know, if you're new to our community, there are a lot of episodes to catch up on, but it's really important that you start from the very beginning at episode number 1. Because episode 1 through to 20 share all of the foundational pillars and frameworks that you need to know to get the best out of listening to this podcast. So I'd recommend that you start there, and the little tip is to maybe start on 1.5 speed. Now, for those of you that are time poor and don't have time to go back from the beginning, don't worry, we've got you covered as well, because we've created a binge guide that goes through all of the details and makes it easy for you to read and get up to speed very, very quickly. So if you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/fast track, you will be able to download that binge guide and you will be up to speed in no time. And whilst you're there, I've got a few extra goodies for you, because we have our top 5 frameworks that you'll learn on this podcast, as well as the Make Money Simple Again ebook, which will help you with the foundations of basic money management, so you'll have everything you need to succeed in building your own lifestyle design and getting the best out of this podcast. Now, just a reminder that anything that we cover on this podcast is not considered financial advice. We certainly recommend that you get your unique circumstances looked at by your individual advisor, and everything we talk about is just general in nature. But folks, I want to encourage you again to go to thepropertycouch.com.au/fast track, and you can go and get all those goodies and catch up right away.